Hello guys! I don't know what is it lately with these counter gambits, but yesterday, by a total accident, I stumbled upon a brand new counter gambit which you can play against the Ortoschnapp gambit. So if you are not familiar with the Ortoschnapp gambit, it happens in the French defense when they play this early c4, they exchange these pawns, and then they bring their queen to b3. So this is the Ortoschnapp gambit. It was popularized by some big YouTube chess content creators, and also me myself. I played this opening in 2021. Anyways, if you like to play French defense and you struggle against the Ortoschnapp gambit and you would like to learn some crazy new line to play against this, check this out. So you bring your knight to f6. Now, unfortunately, most guys are going to play pawn to e5. I say unfortunately, but if we turn on the stockfishes, it's still just preferable for black. You get to play knight to e4 and you have a very nice outposted knight here, which is hard to get rid of for white. I mean, like, there is one line you should learn: after pawn to d4, you have to play pawn to c5, and black is scoring actually pretty well in this line. But there might be some funny traps. I haven't really looked deeply into this one. But for example, if they try to harass the knight right away with something like pawn to d3, you go knight to c5, hitting the queen. For example, queen to c2 here is already better for black, like quite a lot. And even funnier is queen to b5 check, which gets their queen trapped right away after pawn to c6. This is hilarious. Well, they can go queen to b4, but you fork them. And they can capture the knight, but then you capture the queen with your bishop. Anyways, maybe a separate video about these lines. In today's video, we are only going to be looking at the secondary move, pawn captures on d5. So here we are going to recapture with our knight, and 90% of the time people are going to play bishop to c4. Because this is how the Ortoschnapp gambit players do. They want to create this early pressure against f7. So here we are going to respond with bishop to e6, just totally hanging our b7 pawn, which most guys are going to grab. And just a fun fact, if they play the secondary most played move, knight to c3, this is actually a transposition to another gambit which I am preparing in the Scandinavian opening, which is interesting how these two can transpose to each other. But anyways, after queen captures on b7, the most played move, this is now officially a counter gambit because we are now down a pawn. But we're not stopping there, because our rook is hanging, but we don't care. We just play bishop to c5, hanging our rook in the corner. By the way, there is an alternative move, knight to b4, which the engine likes even more, but nobody here is capturing the rook, unfortunately. But after bishop to c5, 95% of the time, people are greedily going to capture the rook, which is actually a slight mistake. And after we get castled, we are down 6 points of material, but black is doing better according to the fish. Now let me tell you right away what is the best continuation for white here, which nobody played so far, but it is still going to just get their queen trapped and we will be winning the queen. So I mean, I ran the engines for a while and this is what the engine came up with. It's pawn to d3, we can play pawn to c6, making sure the queen cannot escape. Now they should develop knight to f3, and we go queen to b6, threatening the f2 pawn, so they should get castled. And now we just simply drop our knight back to c7, and the queen is trapped. End of the story. If we turn on the stockfish is not super impressed, because we are going to be losing minor piece and a rook and a pawn for the cost of their queen. But from the human standpoint of view, I think this is just super great position for black. And yes, stockfish will of course defend it somehow with their pieces, but not humans. Okay, anyways, this has never been even played, and what I would actually like to go through in this video are the moves that get played. So let's just go one by one. Let's see the most played moves, and let's start with the least played moves. So the least played move, only played once, is bishop captures the knight on d5. Then there are some knight to f3, knight to e2. Then there is knight to c3, and queen to b7 is the most played move, trying to bail out with the queen. Alright, so starting with the bishop captures the knight on d5. This looks like a reasonable move because our knight is kind of just threatening to go knight to b6 and fork the bishop and the queen in the corner. So this one guy tried to make sure that this doesn't happen and capture the knight. Well, turns out this is kind of a pretty big mistake because after bishop recaptures, the queen is already trapped. And just to tell you the whole story, how this continued, this guy captured at least the knight since he figured out his queen is trapped. So the queen was taken, and now he developed knight to f3 in hopes of getting castled quickly. Unfortunately, after rook to e8 check, there is nothing to block this check with, and he is forced to move the king. King to f1 would prolong the game a little more, but he played king to d1, and this runs into a nice queen sacrifice. And queen to b3 check. Wasn't played, but this is what I found with the stockfish. Because after the queen is captured, this is checkmate. Okay, so moving on to the next move, which is knight to f3. Seems like a reasonable move, trying to perhaps get castled. This move doesn't work for a funny reason, and the reason is the knight is now occupying a square which the queen would like to use. Let me explain this in more detail. So, as I explained, we have kind of a threat of knight to b6 forking the bishop and the queen. But this doesn't really work yet, because for example, if white would play pawn to d3, if we try to fork them right here, let me turn on the stockfish. Actually, the queen is very happily going to f3, and now the queen is safe, and white is just up so much material that he is just winning here. But it is a different story if they play knight to f3. So if we turn on the stockfish here, now knight to b6 is the winning move. And after we play this, the best thing that white can do is to sacrifice the queen for the knight. So the problem for them is if they would try to save the queen, for example, with queen to e4, now we capture this bishop, it is a free piece. Well, now we are down an exchange, but the problem for them is they cannot get castled, and we have ideas of rook to e8 and winning the queen. And they cannot actually prevent this. If they try to move the queen away, let's turn on the stockfish again. It's a rook to e8, check, and the fish is saying they need to just go right back with the queen on the e-file and just lose it. Otherwise, we would have some checkmating ideas already. Okay, so that's why knight to f3 doesn't work. Moving on to the next move, and that is knight to e2. This move is kind of one of the more playable ones, but we are going to have some annoying attack going here. So first of all, we can sacrifice our bishop on f2, which they should capture. And after that, of course, queen to h4 check. Now they can either block this check or go to f1. Stockfish says going to f1 is better, but in either case, we are able to recapture one of our pieces back. And here, I believe the stockfish is saying that it's time to do some prison break with the queen and they should capture this pawn on a7. But after that, bishop to g4, and we are applying pp on the pp rule. And who is going to be saving this knight? Well, if they try to protect it with the knight to c3, we just capture this, and this is like -4 for black. And if they try to save it with the queen, we just add another piece to the attack with the rook to e8. And this is once again something around -4 for black. So this is not really playable. The engine is suggesting here just to move the king over and give up the knight entirely, after which we are already hitting another unprotected piece, which I just don't see that people will be playing here. Okay, let's go back. So knight to g2, fish would play this, but humans wouldn't. Now the second most played move is knight to c3. This one is already a big blunder, And the reason is we are simply going to capture this knight, and after that we are also hitting this unprotected bishop. But just one thing to keep in mind, because like if they just capture the knight, we can capture the bishop and we are winning here. But if they would capture our bishop on e6, you are not allowed to just recapture here. This would actually be winning for white if we throw on this stockfish. What you have to do if they capture the bishop is you once again have to sacrifice on f2. This way, they are kind of forced to capture this. Now you bring in your queen with queen to d4 check, and after they move it, you go queen to e5 check. And once you maneuver the king to the f1 square, this is where you can capture the bishop, because now you unleash your rook with the discovery to hit the king. And actually the best move here for them is to give up the queen and cover this check with their queen. And the reason is, if they cover it with their knight, which seems like the more logical thing to do, now you can go queen to e2 check, and after king to g1, queen to e1, sacrificing your queen, and after they capture, knight to e2 is checkmate. Okay, let's go back. And now let's have a look at the most played move, which is queen to b7, trying to free the queen. Okay, so in this variation, once again, we have the bishop captures on f2 sacrifice. Now, if they don't accept the bishop and they just move the king to f1, you have this nasty move, bishop back to b6. And the queen is in the jail and it cannot get out. The best move here for white is to go ahead and try to develop something, knight to f3. But now you play this ludicrous move, knight to c3. What a move! Basically, with this move, you are now threatening to capture this bishop, and they cannot capture like this because you go check and then you go mate. So they are kind of forced to just capture the knight on c3, but now you capture the bishop with the check, the king is forced to go to e1, and now notice, if you will, the queen is having some squares to escape. But this is where you play absolutely devastating move, pawn to c6, just closing the door on the queen. And now, no matter what they do, like the stockfish is saying, king to d1, now you play bishop to a6, you hit the queen is trapped, they can prolong the capture with something like queen to the corner. Such a shame. But now you just cover the 7th ranked, and no matter what they play, you are able to trade their queen for a minor piece, and this is winning for you. Okay, so this is if they don't capture the dark square bishop on f2. If they capture it, you go queen to h4 check. In this variation, the best response is to block the check with the g-pawn. And now you don't even capture this, but you go queen to d4 check. The best move here is to go king to g2, and this is now where you capture the bishop, and you are also hitting this bishop. The best move for white here is just unplayable for human. It is to go queen to b3 and just hang that bishop. I mean, who is going to be playing that? What probably will happen is they will try to move, for example, this knight, because they would like to have the bishop protected with the rook. Unfortunately, this doesn't work because we are just going to capture this knight, and after they recapture, we play bishop to d5 and we will win the queen. And if they try to move the other knight to, to guard the bishop, let's say to f3, this just walks to a forced checkmate. And anywhere this knight would move, this would result in some kind of a forced checkmate. Just the stockfish here is too slow to figure this out. Anyways, if they would play the correct move, queen to b3, you can now capture this bishop, and they will try to develop the knight to f3 because now their rook is hitting the queen. And here you have the last of the crazy tactics. You go bishop to h3 check, forcing them to capture this bishop, and now you capture the rook. and your rook is nicely hindering their development, and you are winning here. Alright guys, this is it for this crazy Ortoschnapp unorthodox counter gambit. I hope you had some fun. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, have fun, and yeah, goodbye.